Hello and welcome to Space Shark Teaches. I'm Sean, owner and lead developer of Space Shark Studios, and in this series we're going to be teaching Godot. In this lesson we are going to return to animation and animate the player. So for the player character, we are actually going to be using, make sure he's in the right spot, this PNG sprite sheet that I have made and provided for you, or a link to, in the comment section or the information section of this video. As before, turn on all these things, make it nice and clear, and then we are going to go ahead and open up your player. So we are going to make some changes here. The player sprite is now going to be using this hero sprite. And if you notice, that doesn't look right. It's because we're going to be using this animation field. So animations contain this V-frames, which are, if you hover over it, the number of rows. So vertical frames, H-frames, horizontal frames are the number of columns. And then which frame you're on. This is frame 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And if you have more, it would keep going on. So basically, frame 0 starts up here because it's an array, and arrays start at 0. But vertically, we have 2, and horizontally, we have 4. And we are starting at frame 0. So where do we go from here? Well, now we need to use this new change. Well, first off, let's go ahead and scale our character up and scale the collision shape. You can see we now have our little guy that doesn't really do anything. So we're going to animate him. Go into here, and we are going to add some variables. So first off, let's go ahead and close that. So you can click on any of these to make them smaller. We don't really need output right now. We are going to add 4 variables, and I'll explain what they are as we make them. So first is going to be current frame. It is going to be an integer, starts at 0, and we are not going to export it. If you remember over here, we have which frame it's on. That's what this reference is going to be for. So we're going to be able to know which frame we are on in terms of which frame across here is going to be going. So 0, 1, 2, 3. And it doesn't matter if we're going left or right. Beyond that, we are going to be making move right start frame. So like I said, if you look at the actual player when we have 1 by 1, so moving right is this top section, and the start frame for that is 0. The bottom is when the player is going left, and the start frame for that is over here at 4, because it's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Back over to the scripts. So once again, this is an integer. It starts at 0, and it is exported. We have move left start frame. Once again, integer, started at 0, export, and then we have finally frames per animation. So like I said, in this one we have 4 frames for each animation. So for our player, we are going to set it to 4 frames per animation, and moving left, it will start on frame 4. Next, we are going to make 2 functions. One is called update animation variables, which is where we update this current frame. And the other is just called animate, and that's where we'll actually be running this animation. As normal, we need to add something to our long list of function calls, and we're going to add animate. So after the player's movement has been calculated, we will animate to the next frame. In animate, we want to make sure and first update the animation variables, and then we check, are we going left? Are we going right? Increase the frame counts and all of that good stuff. So to start, like I said, we want to increment the frame count. So we want to move to the next current frame. And first off, I'm going to use a cool tool called comment so that we can start keeping track of what each of these is. So move to next frame, and we are going to say get our current frame, add, we're going to add 1 to it. You can do this by over here, we have the operator add, we have type of any. If you set that to int, you can actually go ahead and set it to an int. So we are going to add 1 to current frame, and then this is very important, we are going to use the remainder function. So what remainder does is it says I have 5. So we are in current frame 5, but we only have 4 frames available, right? So you can see A mod B, which means I have 5. 4 is what I'm going to be jumping over. What is our remainder? Remainder is going to be equal to 1. Another way to think of this is using division. So if you remember from back in math class, when you have 5 divided by 4, you can go say, or you would go and say, okay, how many 4s fits in this 5? Well, it's going to be 1. So you put the 4 down there for long division, and you have now a remainder of 1. Instead of going on with everything else, you now have 1 4 and a remainder of 1. That's what this mod does, is tries and just gets this remainder. We don't care how many 4s are in this 5. We just want to know how many are left. So for instance, 5 mod 4, or another way to see it is 5 mod 4 is the same as 9 mod 4, or 13 mod 4. And if you notice, 9 is 4 greater than 5, 13 is 4 greater than 9. It doesn't matter, as long as you're adding 4 onto this, it's always going to be a remainder of 1. Because we go to 8, and then 1 more is 9, so there's a remainder of 1. We go to 12, 1 more is 13, remainder of 1. And that's what we're doing here, is we're trying to say, all right, we are on the current frame, and we are going to use the number of frames per animation. So what frame should we be on? If current frame is now 5, but we only have 4 frames per animation, then we need to switch back. Or even current frame is 4 and we only have 4 frames of animation, we need to go back to frame 0. So now that we have the remainder, we can actually set, so hold Control, our current frame to this new value that we just got. So now we've been able to set our new current frame. Now we can get out here and say, are we going right? To do that, we're actually going to be using another new trick, which is we are going to get our velocity, and from that we are going to drag it out into empty space and use get. And now we can get the x or y value. So we're going to get x, and we are going to say is x greater than, once again you can switch this to float, greater than 0, which would mean that we are moving to the right. So now, if x is greater than 0, we want to set this current frame, you can drag that in, to be our current frame plus, it's supposed to be int, the move right start frame. So add these two together. Now to review what's going on, if our movement velocity in the x direction is greater than 0, we are going to the right direction. We're going to the right. We are moving. If that's the case, we want to set this sprite's frame to be the current frame that we updated back here, plus the frame, or the first frame, that is moving right in our sprite sheet. And we set that as the value. And now we duplicate this whole thing again if we are not going right. So once again, we take movement velocity, we get x, and if we're trying to figure out if we are going left, we can't use greater than, because greater than will always point that way. So instead, we use less than. We set the type over here to float. We say, are we going less than 0? If we are going less than 0, then what do? We get the current frame, we get the move left start frame, we add them together as well, and then we set the frame from that once again. So you can see it's actually pretty straightforward. You can move a lot of this back to shrink space. And just like before, let's go ahead and add a comment. So, are we going left? And now it's a lot easier to read our code. So first, we update our animation variables. We move to the next frame by saying current frame, add 1 to it, and then see which frame should we be on, starting at 0, and then set it. Then we check if we're going right, update things if we are, and then we check if we're going left, and update things if we are. And now we can check to make sure these get updated so they're the same as their parent, so this player. Now let's see what happens. All right, we are now animating. And so that's it. It looks really jagged right now because we're moving so fast, but we have animations. And in the next lesson, you can skip if you don't want to make the animations better. We are going to be adding some functionality to this animation script, and you can probably skip ahead of some of it if you don't want to go through it, because it's going to be more complex than these last two. If you do skip, the next lesson is going to go over moving these platforms, because we've had a lot of requests for people wanting these platforms to move back and forth. That's it for this lesson. Thank you for watching, and this has been Sean with Space Shark Teaches.